Hi. Oh, I'm Dr. Khoi, in case you couldn't figure it out. I feel like I should have changed my appearance a little bit today. Well, it's a pleasure to have these two luminaries. And obviously, I don't really need to do a long introduction because everybody's here because you know who these two guys are. And they have so much in common. They both are best-selling authors. Their books both went onto the New York Times. I'm a little challenged here. But their books went on the New York Times bestseller list immediately, which is no mean feat. They both have been recipients of the National Medal for the Humanities, so they've been to the highest levels of our government and been honored that way. They both have been selected by Oprah, which is just south of the Nobel Prize for Literature, I think. She probably thought she was getting the same guy again. I don't know. Yeah.
Actually,
probably not.
no, I mean, actually, I have a story.
Feel free to
about
interrupt me anytime.
Well, when we got, Abraham doesn't know this, but when we got the award in 2016, we were in the White House together. There were a bunch of us there. And I had to go to the bathroom, and I was on my way to the bathroom, and this lady came to me, and she said, "Doctor, I just love your work." I didn't know who she was, so I said, thanks. She said, "I'm from California, too." I said, "Oh, thank you very much, thank you." And then later on, I realized that she thought I was him.
Can you hear us in the back? Pretty well. Yeah, a little bit more in the volume. Yeah. All right. I don't know if that can be done remotely. So she's oh, doctor. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, we get that all the time.
Yeah.
I have a colleague who superficially looks like me, and every now and then someone on campus will say, "Are you Dr. Verghese?" And he'll say, "Yes, I am." And he'll sign their books.
Sorry. Well, when they come up to you and say, "You're that guy," you just can't argue with that. What do you say? But the other thing I was thinking that you have in common is that although these two books that are on the bestseller list are these works of fiction, you both started with a memoir. But before I say that, did you ever forgive him for ripping off the title of your book? Like
his
the
book,
Color of Water, Covenant of Water. We know this is like that.
Yeah, that's. I'm sure when he was writing this book, he had no idea that he a book title. I mean, he can tell us better, but Abraham is a high artist, and artists who do what they do, they don't think of whatever anyone else is doing. Water is a big part of his book. I mean, it's the key. It's a key connective element. A book title is just a label. It's the name of the writer that people ultimately, figure out and remember. But so no, doesn't bother me at all. I mean, it's a different book. It's a lot of book, and it's hard to maintain that kind of narrative over the course of that many pages. That's something I professionally am not capable of that. Some people can. Few can do it at that level, which makes him special,
You just asked about the memoir, though. Just starting with a memoir, is that something that was something you really always wanted to write, or did you see yourself as a fiction writer, and this was a way to get started in a way of the process of writing?
Well, first of all, what a lovely thing to hear from someone I've admired from a distance for a long time. So thank you for that. Very sweet. I personally wanted to write fiction. That was my first ambition. I really thought the story that became My Own Country about HIV in a small town, I thought that would be fiction. And in fact, my very first publication while I was at Iowa was something based on what I thought this novel would be. And it was published in the New Yorker. And the New Yorker just took that story called Lilacs, a very dark story.
Yeah.
And then once the editors got to know a bit about my background, foreign infectious disease physician living in the South, the Deep South, taking care of HIV, it had a lot of, buttons that it hit in publishing. And the New Yorker asked me to send them a proposal for a long nonfiction piece on AIDS in rural America. And I was excited because the New Yorker pays $1 a word. And I thought, 100,000 words, 3-part series. But to make a long story short, the editor turned it down. And because he was leaving and the new editor had come on board, she wasn't as excited. Tina Brown. I did other stuff for her, but not that.
She is bumming out now, I tell you.
Well, I did other stuff for her. But my agent, meanwhile, saw the nonfiction proposal for the New Yorker and said, this could be a book proposal. And so I sort of by default wound up writing nonfiction. There was a lot of interest. There was an auction. And next thing I know, I have a contract to write a nonfiction book. I knew nothing about writing nonfiction. That was my introduction.
I came to it differently. I was a journalist. I went to Oberlin for undergrad, and I went to Columbia for journalism, and then I was a journalist for 9 years, and then I was a musician for 9 years. I traveled all over, you know. And during that time, I just came to realize, I'd written a magazine piece about my mother when I first got started at the Boston Globe. And it got a big reaction, but I left it alone. But then when I was traveling, I just got tired of traveling. I got tired of, you know, everything I owned I bought in a truck stop somewhere. I didn't like, I mean, I love music, but, so I had an agent who was after me to do a book, and so I wrote some fiction. She didn't like it, and then I just decided to, you know, pitch the idea of doing the book about my mother, because she was moving up in years and she was starting to be a little more open about her past, and so I did it. I got a very modest advance, but to me it was all right, and I took that money and wrote the book. I wrote it while I was still working as a musician, so I wrote it in vans and on buses and Motel 6, all of that.
Well, it was your first time at bat, and you hit a home run with that Color of Water. That struck.
It was just lucky.
How many people have read The Color of Water?
All right. Well, I bought a new car because of you. But you know, it just was one of those things where it just happened to come along at the right time, you know.
Anyway, even though you were writing about AIDS patient in practice, you still had to bring in your family into it. I mean, your wife, your children, and you're writing about your mother, and your siblings are making appearance. Is it hard to you have to seek permission for? I remember there's that quote by Mirage that, you know, when a writer is born into a family, that's the end of the family.
You know, I think for me it was tricky to write nonfiction because, you know, my editor would keep saying I would be describing these intimate moments in the lives of, you know, these people that I was describing in Tennessee with HIV and their families, and you know, but I was sort of a character in the story to some degree, in that I was affecting their lives, and the editor kept saying to me, you can't just slam the door every time the camera swings towards you. The reader has to know more about you. And you know, somewhat reluctantly, I fessed up more and more, but I found it hard. I found it really hard. I mean, I'm comfortable with it now in the sense that if the reader's done me the honor of reading the book, then they've earned the right to that intimate view of my personal life. It's, you know, it's not quite like I got on the sofa and jumped up and down and announced my, you know, all my personal foibles. It's a very select audience you're speaking to. Nevertheless, I found it difficult. I found it challenging. And given an option, I'd much rather write fiction, which to me is much more difficult because the reader has to suspend their disbelief. This didn't really happen, but also much more liberating.
So it's liberating to create your own characters and not...
Yeah, in the sense, like, I think the rule of nonfiction is, you know, this really happened. That's the contract with the reader. That's the basis of their interest. And so you can rearrange, you can dramatize, but you can't make up. Whereas with fiction, I think the great joy is, you know, you can report from being dead and come back, and you know, you can do anything you want, you know, which I think is wonderful.
Sometimes I think nowadays that fiction actually is held to a higher standard of truth than nonfiction?
I don't think of it that way. I'm not smart enough to think about that kind of stuff. If I did, I wouldn't be able to write at all. So, you know, I think the jump from nonfiction to fiction really has to do less with craft and more with your view of the world. And so, you know, you have to believe in the good. I mean, journalism is based on finding out what's wrong. Fiction, at least in my opinion, should be based on trying to find out what can work or what's right. So that's sort of my view of it.
So and I agree, I hate to say, you know, fiction should do, it's like what it can do, though, that art can have a nobler message, or can, is that something that you feel like is important when you create something, that it has some kind of positive and...
I mean, if fiction works, then it's true. You know, it's out there.
Yeah.
You have to find it. You know, if you're lucky enough to find it, the characters will, you know, push the story, they'll lift the story, and you'll find the truth, you know, whatever that truth might be, whatever that truth. You're trying to illuminate things for people.
Yeah, I mean, I concur with that. I love a quote that I think began with Camus, and Dorothy Allison paraphrased it. She said, fiction is the great lie that tells the truth about how the world lives. And I think when fiction resonates with us, it's because, you know, there are echoes in it that we know this is true, this is instructive, this is how the world is. You know, even the most outlandish premise, if it resonates with a lot of people, it's typically because there's some archetypal people, images, things that the reader just knows are true. Yeah. At least that's the kind of fiction that I respond to, where I sense that I'm being educated about the world by this fictional device.
And the truth isn't just the plot, right? The truth is driven by the characters being true. These characters, people, things that you draw from your own experience, patients you've met, people in your family. How do you create these true characters?
I mean, look, for me,
send all the tough questions to him.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm almost ready to start taking questions from the audience.
Well, no, I you know, the characters that I, you know, create or allow me to see them often come from my own life. You know, my latest book, you know, the main character is a Jewish woman who works in a store. That was my mother and my grandmother. But you know, on the page in fiction, they do think. My grandmother was in a terrible marriage and she wasn't loved, but I put her on the page and I made her loved, and that was, you know, that was one of the gifts that God allowed to happen. But I didn't really know that she was. I mean, if you haven't read the book, I don't want to spoil it for you, but I didn't know what would happen to her until the book started to roll out. You know, books. You know, you hope they go in a direction. You know, you sort of like, it's like jazz. You hope you can play the right thing, but you know, by the time you figure out that there's a D natural in the key of B flat, they're in G flat now. Where are you going to make that B flat work? I mean, we're going to make the D work. It's not. You know, they're gone. They're playing. You know, so it's just you know, I find my characters in my memory and life, and also I find them in books. I do tons of research. My whole life is research. Everything I do is everything. When I walk down the street, when I take the subway, I never sit around and talk. I just go. I'm researching all the time.
When you said, sorry, God gave you a gift, you mean the gift to be able to rewrite your grandmother's narrative? Is that what you?
Well, no. I mean, I don't think of it that way. No, I just when I think of the character Shona, I just think of, I wanted her to be loved. I knew my grandmother wasn't loved by her husband.
Right.
So.
That was in The Color of Water, yeah.
Yeah, but you know, after that, the character becomes her own person. You know, I'm not recreating my grandmother and, I'm going to let my grandmother do this, I'm going to let my that's a mistake. I'm sure Abraham can enunciate it much better than I can. But once these characters arrive, they start moving around. And your job is to follow them. You're hoping that they'll do these things that you would expect or hope given the way you want the story to roll out. But sometimes it doesn't go that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can honestly say that I make my characters up out of whole cloth. I really don't have any character based on somebody I know. But that, by the same token, they can start off very flat, and I think it's multiple revisions before they become three-dimensional. The young bride who begins Covenant of Water, might have been loosely based on my great-grandmother who married very young, but I never knew her. I never saw a picture of her. I don't think there were pictures of her. So it was really just an idea. And then as you write, the character becomes more nuanced, more layered. I think there's an aphorism in writing which I love, which is that character is defined by actions taken under pressure. It's also true of life, by the way. Mm-hmm. Character is defined by how you react when you're under pressure. And so inevitably at some point in the narrative, the character's under pressure and reacts a certain way. Sometimes not the way I thought I would make them react. They sort of dictate another course. And to me, that's the magical moment when you sort of realize you have a three-dimensional character with will. And I don't know if this happens to you, but I mean, I now think of the characters in my books as real people, who have either passed away or I'm going to run into soon. They're concrete. They're not abstract anymore. They've become real.
They're real for a lot of the readers. And you mentioned this morning how moving it was for you to read it in the audio and then kill some of these people off like you always do.
Yeah. And even that sort of felt organic. It wasn't that I was just killing people left and right. The fact is that there was a high mortality in that period of time I was talking about. Almost every family lost at least one child to typhoid or accident.
Yeah.
And even those were surprises. I knew that they had to happen, not because I planned it, but it was just suddenly I just sort of knew. And God knows what that is, the muse, the right brain, God, but you just trust it. If you're surprised, you hope the reader will be surprised.
Yeah.
Not cheap surprised, but surprised in the sense of the story opening up in a certain way.
Yeah. Your characters, I have to say, I love the nicknames or the names you give: Little Onion, Dog, Pie, Sport Coat, Light Bulb, Pudgy Fingers, Monkey Pants, Dodo. I mean, I could go on, but where do you come up with these
Oh, I don't know. I work at it. I have a little notebook that I carry with me all the time. I don't have it in my pocket, but it's in my coat back there, and I'm always listening for another name, a name that has some punch and has some muscle, and I write them down, and I have a whole list of names that I can call on, because I can't write the character until I have a name for the character. I have to name the character first, otherwise it just becomes, she does, or, because when you name them, they jump out the desk drawer a little bit.
Yeah.
They nudge themselves out, and then after a while, they have some color.
There's a little bias that comes through when I'm reading it, and it's like the more outlandish the name, the more lovable that character is in your books. I don't know if you're aware of that. I'm just letting you know.
No, I didn't know that.
There's a tell, there's a cheat there.
Well, okay. Well, when Ham Sandwich becomes a name, call me. Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, okay. I'll keep that in mind.
Were there nicknames for you when you were growing up? Did your family have a nickname for you?
Oh, yeah. My siblings called me Charlie Brown, after the Charles Schultz character. Musicians used to call me, some of them call me Brittle, some call me Cuddy, Because when you're a musician, somebody gives you a nickname that sticks. But a name is just a label that, the muscle is in what that person does. The name is just a label to let the reader know this person is doing that. I would imagine.
Really?
I imagine Abraham has a difficult time with names with American audiences. I would imagine that, you say to yourself, is this going to, maybe not. I'd be curious myself to know how.
Well, actually, I mean, I think it's a great question because, like, for example, the character Big Amachi in the book, I could have used the Malayalam word for big Amachi, but I think it would have just been like a stumbling block for the reader to arrive at an unrecognizable word like Walya Amachi. It just wouldn't, it wouldn't. And so big seemed like a way for them to have access. And I also like the idea. I mean, I had a auntie that we called Big Amachi as well. So, but when I went to India with the book recently, I was often asked about that, why did you name her this way? And I would give this explanation that, to many readers for whom this is not their native tongue, it would be a stumbling block, But I must say, I have regretted some character decisions. For example, in Cutting for Stone, I have an Ethiopian girl whose name is Gannath. Mm-hmm. That's how you say it, Gannath. It's spelled G-E-N-E-T.
Oh, and everybody saying Jeanette or something like that.
If I had known that readers would come and ask me about Jeanette, I would have definitely picked another name. So I've learned to sort of think about how this sounds for the reader, even though it's ethnically a true pronunciation. Yeah.
I think names are really important. I mean, it's the first chance we get to abuse our children is when we name them. That's going to last the whole life. So there's a lot more. I think, even though you say you're just putting the name and it's the character, I think that there's some love there that you are bestowing on these characters with some of these names.
Well, I mean, I love all the characters I write about because they instruct me, about ways to live and to be. Some of the more outlandish characters, I say, I've met versions of them in my life, or, but they help me. I mean, it helps me to love these people. It helps me get out of bed, It helps me realize that there's possibility of change in the world. It helps me to know that, someone has come in this direction before me and that they're going to maybe do a better job at living and loving than I could do, with a lot less. So, but again, it's all, it's all, you just become part of that story, and then your job is to just illuminate things and just let it roll, and just remind yourself that the reader can always pick up the remote and just, click you away and go to reality TV. So you have to figure out a way to power and sustain, let the narrative sustain itself if you can. And that's really your job.
A lot of the revision goes into that, I would imagine. When you revise, are you reading it aloud when you're revising?
Yeah, I revise constantly. I think one of the sad things, in a way, is that you have no idea of how many times you've revised a certain page. I mean, you might have the document open and revise that page 50 times, and then you save it. But, unlike the old archival material where people type up one draft and another draft, I have no idea how many drafts I have. But yeah, I really believe in, I compose on the screen, but I edit on the page. So I print out and I read aloud.
You read aloud.
But I also think I need to print it out in order to say, these 50 pages go here, these 30 go there, these 100 go in the round file under the desk, There's something about handling the paper that matters a lot to me. I think the computer gives you the illusion that you can see the whole book, but really you can only see at best a page or two at a time. I love the sense of bulk. Maybe I got carried away with 700 pages of liking the sense of paper, but I like that.
Many a tree has gone the way of the buffalo. I do the same thing, actually.
Yeah.
Except I tend to handwrite my first anywhere between 20 and 50 pages. After that, once I got steam up, then I'll type. And then I print them out, and I hand edit them, similar to the way he does.
And are you reading it aloud? Or do you
No, I don't read it. Sometimes I'll read dialogue out loud, because I work hard on dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I'll read dialogue out loud.
But not the other?
But not the page. I don't even read my books on tape. I just, once I'm done with it,
So you've never been tempted to do the audio of one of your books?
No, man, I was a musician I was a performer for a long time. And, I don't like to do it no more. I just read John Le Carre's The Pigeon Tunnel, and he read it himself. And then I started reading, Carr reading his novels, and when he reads them, he takes the pages, the characters. I wonder if you do that as well. Like when you read, you adopt a different voice for the character. Do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I must say, I found that I recently have really enjoyed audiobooks for the last 10 years or so, which was a revelation to me. I think I was a bit of a purist, like, well, that's not the book,
Right.
But I found myself listening more and more and enjoying the fact that I could be listening and, walking or driving to work. And so that did make me much more conscious when I read back my work, how it was really going to sound on the page. And when I recorded the audiobook, I really had the sense that I wish I'd done this paragraph slightly differently, because there's a beat that is extra that didn't need to be there, or something like that. But I think in general, I said this morning, that it should be a red flag when you find an author reading their own book, for the most part, except for nonfiction. I mean, I'm not kidding. I mean, look at Tom Lake. It's read by Meryl Streep, and Cormac McCarthy's All the Pretty Horses is Brad Pitt. They need to perform the book. And the only reason that I literally auditioned to do it, is because there's a lot of ethnic terms in there, and I didn't want to be pulling what little hair I have left out, listening to someone mangle, a term. So, but it was a steep learning curve for me. I mean, I had to learn how to pitch my voice slightly up and down to capture men and women on the same page. I had to learn to do dialogue and accents, but not too much, every kind, South Indian, North Indian, Glaswegian, Geordie, Geordie, and so on. So it was challenging, but a lot of fun. I mean, since I didn't live in a studio the way this man must have, to me it was a very exciting new experience to be there and have a producer and a technician and keep redoing things, and it was fun.
Yeah. Did you know that he had read the audio in his book?
No, I didn't.
You should check out the Digby voice. That's pretty.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I got a long drive ahead. We'll
Can
get.
I ask how many of you listened to the audiobook?
Yeah.
That's wonderful. It's impressive.
Yeah. That's. So you've never been tempted to. You're just done with it.
No, I don't care. There's a guy who's read my last 2 or 3 books. His name is Dominic. I can't remember his last name, but he's so good. Every time I have a book come out, I say, "Is Dominic available?" And they say, "Yes, he is." He did a wonderful job with the last book, particularly with the Yiddish words and the pronunciations and the sort of the differentiating between the different European accents, the black people and the people from, he did a good job.
The Color of Water has 2 audio book versions, and I love one of them, and the other one I don't love.
Well, to be honest with you, I've never heard it.
Yeah.
I've never listened to it. I don't really like to listen. I don't like to really go back to The Color of Water, because my mother died in 2010, and my brother Billy died before she did, and my siblings and I, we're very close, and we never talk about the book. We just. I like my sister Rosetta. You asked earlier, people who are living in nonfiction. My sister Rosetta said, "Why did you say I was fat?" I was like, I mean, what am I supposed to say? But I mean, but Rosetta's my, I love Rosetta. I love all my siblings. And so, we're not bonded by a book. We're bonded by the luck we feel, the good fortune we had to be raised by a very unique person. Yeah. But I never listened to the audiobook. Actually, when I'm done with the book, I am pretty much done. Now, I will say, though, I did listen to the audio version of The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, and I really enjoyed it. And I heard things and saw things in my imagination that I didn't see when I was writing the book. And I imagine you do that as well when you're reading, you know, things, right?
Yeah, it does open up, you know,
It opens up
possibilities that I hadn't been aware of, indeed.
Yeah.
By the way, I found out in my practice, I learned that if you spell fat, P-H-A-T, people don't mind being called fat. I just, you know, it's funny. They just think it's really cool. You're fat, P-H-A-T. And they're fine with that. It's interesting. So, famously, you have this huge whiteboard that you diagrammed the Marmor Convention or something like that for.
Yeah, I mean, this is, by the way, that was the original title that became The Covenant of Water. But, you know, that huge whiteboard, I don't know how it's become famous, but it's completely misleading.
It's famous in our household.
It's completely misleading in the sense that, you know, I live alone, so I've always thought living rooms have really no function. You know, these pretty furniture that nobody sits on, so I cleared everything out and made one whole wall a whiteboard. And that's where I write. And I thought, you know, the last novel took me 7 years. The one before that, 5 years. The one before that, 4 years. And I thought, you know, the trend is very depressing, you know. So I said, I'm going to really be efficient on this new novel. And I wanted to outline the whole thing. I thought I did. I'm very visual, so I draw faces. And so I had the whole thing. It looked great. Then I start writing, and the writing goes off in another direction. So then I wind up photographing the whiteboard, erasing it, and starting again. So I have about 6 iterations of that whiteboard, which never wound up being the book. It was always, you know, way behind the book, so to speak.
It didn't really work, and you took 14
years. It didn't work
years
for
on
me.
this one. Yeah.
I mean, I think there are writers, I don't know what James is like. There are writers like John Irving who know the last line of the book. They know the first line of the book. They know the last and first line of every chapter. And, you know, someone like him will say, you know, has said to me, he's been a mentor and a good friend, Abraham, if you're just, you know, you need to know what's happening in this book. You need to know what you're hiding under the table when you bring it out. If you're just making it up as you go along, you're not a writer. You're an ordinary liar is what you are. But I do think there are writers like Michael Ondaatje, for example.
He was here a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he said to me when I told him about this, he said, you know, John is right, but in a sense, everybody arrives at this point in the novel where you do know the whole story. And for me, that took a couple of years. And suddenly I saw the ending, and once you know that, then you do see the whole story. And so in a sense, we arrive where John starts. He does months and months of preparation. But I guess, you know, my stumbling way, beginning with an image, I also arrive at that place, but it's still very inefficient. I'm curious what James does.
You have
Well, I do. What I take a big white piece of paper and I draw a circle and I put the names of the characters in the circle, and I just try to and I just draw lines with pencil about who connects with who, and then I'll erase the lines and rename the characters and then do that again. But once I get started, that's before I write. The writing doesn't take me long. It's the research that takes me a long time.
How long did it take to write Heaven and Earth Grocery Store? Once you start down and started writing.
The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store is Heaven and Earth Grocery Store actually started as about a book about a camp, about a friend of mine who ran a camp for disabled kids, and I wrote quite a bit of it before I threw all of it out except for one chapter. And then, so I just got rid of all that stuff, got rid of the circle, and then drew a different circle. And then love basically powered that book because of the relationship between Moshe and Shona. And so the other things they were dangling in the air. They were names on my board, and they just folded in naturally. Because once the relationships start, things can happen. Abraham, you know, he has a series of cataclysmic, I like that word, events that connect generations. And he figured out a way to make it connect, which is not easy. But for me, the relationship of these people, some of whom are family and some of whom are not, are based more on sort of the American ideals of what what we think we are as opposed to what we are, and the idea of community in terms of what we think we have and what we really have or had. So, and all that starts to mush together once you start driving into story, and then the story begins, as he explained, it starts to take over, and you realize you're going left to right. Like, I don't know how John Irving, listen, however you can get across the pond, you know, some of us jump on lily pads and we go down, you know, but however you can get to the other side, amen. I
love what you said about the commonalities. You know, for me, I came here when I was 14 from another country. You know, I feel like I spend my life trying to tell people we're actually more alike than different. You know, it's just like explaining myself. I go, and I feel that maybe it's not intentional in your novels, or maybe it is, but I get that from your writing, and I thank you for that.
I mean, I'm sure that Abraham can speak to that.
Yeah. I want to just say that I'm a sucker for anything that shows me how to write a book better. So I know my whiteboard is next going to have a big circle.
Yeah.
I also have, you know, in my study where I keep all my books, I have one whole shelf that's all about writing. You know, how to write a best-selling novel in 3 days. You know, those kind of. And I have this fetish where I go to a bookstore and I can't help it. I have to keep buying these because God knows there might be a secret in there. And I finally stopped when I picked up one of those books, and they were quoting me. I thought, okay, that's it. You know?
Yeah. The commonality. Yeah.
Sorry, that's it.
Yeah. About the commonalities you were.
The commonality of the human spirit.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we all, you know, we all want the same thing. We all want love. We want a family. We want people to be happy, and you try to do that without writing a book that says take your medicine, and you do that by introducing conflict and how you resolve that. You know, then you as the writer get to choose. You know, and you usually. It's effective if you choose love, but not just by writing a cheap novel or something. But you know, you show how people love. Sometimes showing love is just being quiet. You know, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't start off with a premise of this is my premise and my theme, and
just want to tell a good story.
A good story well told. You know,
okay.
And so I think the biggest commonality would be a good story well told. But I do think that. For me, the elements that wind up resonating, and it's not like I have 20 novels to point to, I have 2, but the recurring themes are family, you know, the poignancy of life, because, you know, life is a terminal condition. We're not here forever. It's all transient, and, you know, love, death, loss. It's always the same elements, I think, that make it a good story well told.
Something you just said now, it's like a complete tangent, but you mentioned going into an independent bookstore and boy, if there was a plug you want to put in, it's for independent bookstores. I think you know, I think Cutting for Stone that, and I think some of your experience too, that the books that weren't just flying off at the beginning, it's like the independent bookstores that really helped with.
Oh, there's no question about that.
Right?
Yeah, I'm sure that I became a successful writer because of independent bookstores. There's no, I mean, I'm very grateful for, you know, Barnes and Nobles and Amazon. You know, Abraham and I share some common ground in that regard as well. But in the earlier part of my career, The Color of Water was hand sold by booksellers. Booksellers would recommend it to, you know, people who came into bookstores, and that's how it, because when it came out with a bunch of other books that were about mixed race people, you know, Divided Soul, you know, matzo balls and chicken shit, you know. I mean, it was just like, and it was ridiculous, you know. But it was hand sold. It was people, booksellers did that. Independent bookstores, they're crucial. They're like librarians. They're the last line of defense.
Yeah. That was your experience with Cutting for Stone?
It was, yeah, very much like that. I think all my books have really counted on, you know, readers of all kind, but the conduit has really been independent bookstores. I remember with Cutting for Stone, we were killed in our tracks in hardback by a nasty review by someone nobody had ever heard of. You know, there was no need for that review, but it just sort of stopped us in our tracks. And Knopf, you know, had high hopes for the book and put a lot of effort behind it. But it was a time when you know, that was the measure of a book, was the New York Times Book Review. Now it's very different, I think. And so it did okay in hardback, not anywhere near what they wanted or expected. And then in paperback, you know, it was released, and I remember showing up at a bookstore in Marin, Book Passage, and I was supposed to do a reading, and I could not find parking. And I thought, this is annoying. How am I going? You know, and I walk in there and realize they're all there to see me, and somehow, you know, independent bookstores, the word of mouth, book clubs. Thank you, book clubs. You know?
And libraries.
And libraries.
And libraries,
you know?
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, the wonderful thing about independent bookstores is they curate reading. They curate my reading. I go into my store and, you know, I know them well enough to say I'd like something fresh to read, and whatever they hand me, I don't even question it. I just buy it and leave.
Yeah. You know, in this country right now, we got this, it seems like this huge rupture that's going on so much. I mean, we all feel it. It's such a source of stress for all of us, this feeling like we're, I wonder, there's, you go back to the history of nation building, to how important like this common canon of literature was, that in a way created an imaginary community of shared experience through literature, of reading the same thing. Do you have a sense of like who reads your book, and whether there's people on all sides of the spectrum who read and have a similar reaction to your book? Is that something that you experience or think about?
I'll go first. I mean, I think it's, yeah, I think that people on both sides of our national divide are enjoying the book, and you know, I think in a way it's a nice meeting ground. It's a place where, you know, there really is no controversy, and I think it helps that it's about another culture entirely, which in some ways I think makes you stop and, you know, wonder about some of our squabbles about much smaller things. But you know, I love the idea of a book, you know, capturing society and bringing them together. For example, I think Uncle Tom's Cabin, that book, for all its failings, I think it ended slavery in America. I think, you know, it just got so popular, it made the notion of slavery untenable. So I like to tell my students, it wasn't a president or a army or a political scientist that did this. It was a novel that, you know, again, as I say, with all its failings, nevertheless captured the public imagination and made slavery untenable. In England or the UK, a book called The Citadel, which I love, depicting, you know, medical conditions in a Welsh mining town, so outraged the public that, you know, the National Health Service was born. I just worry that we don't have quite the number of readers needed for a book to capture society, especially if we're in the business of burning books and banning books, you know. Then it's a non-starter, but I would love to think that might be possible.
By the way, The Citadel is by A.J. Cronin.
A.J. Cronin, yes.
If you wanted to.
Well, I mean, I you know, when people ask me to recommend the book, I tell them I recommend The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer. I think that's probably the most important book in America right now. And in terms of readers, well, I know our current president reads books. I can't speak to the other guy. I don't know what kind of books he's reading. So, I mean, we have a responsibility as writers and people of reason and discourse to tell the truth. And the truth is that, you know, democracy is on the edge, and we have a responsibility to protect that democracy. So, I don't think the other guy reads books at all. And I don't care what anyone thinks about that. You know, I think that I'm tired of us sitting here pretending that everything is going to be okay and covering our heads with, again, read William Shirer's book when he was in Nazi Germany, when the Third Reich began its rise. And he spells it out with distinct clarity. and you can draw a parallel between just about everything that happened there and what's happening now. And of course, I'm very sensitive to elements involving the Jewish people because of my own history. So I'm concerned about it, and I think we as writers have a responsibility to speak out about it. And if it insults people, well, too bad, because this is the time you have to speak out.
I think that's a good note to end on.